I am Lauren Wampa. I will be moderating this conversation today, and we're going to be talking about, what is it like to clear these hurdles, landmines, culture fit landmines in software engineering. We have an illustrious panel of folks who have a wealth of experiences and backgrounds that will be able to chat about all the things that they've encountered and probably give some recommendations as to how we can collectively do better. So without further ado, I will hand it over to our amazing panelists to just give us a brief intro of who they are and what they're up to. So Rhonda, do you mind if I start with you?
I am happy to start. Thanks for having me. I am thrilled for this conversation. It's going to be good, juicy, as we described it before we got on. I am Rhonda Allen, CEO of DevColor. DevColor is an incredible career accelerator built by Black software engineers for Black software engineers and technologists, and I couldn't be happier to be leading in the work with them. As a mother of Black boys, as a Black woman myself, I found myself in 2020 really wanting to be more proximate and in alignment with people and the values that I care about and that I like to center. So thrilled to be leading that work. I am originally from Jacksonville, Arkansas. You may or may not hear the Southern twang come out in this conversation, but proximity and community is something I carry with me everywhere I go. So I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much. Marty, you want to go next? You're up next in my screen.
Yeah, Lauren, thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Marty. I'm Director of Product at Salesforce. I have been in tech pretty much my whole career. I'm originally from Wisconsin. Yes, Black people are from Wisconsin. No, there's a lot of us. All Black everything, Black schools, Black everything. But yeah, I'm currently in the Bay, and when I am not doing Salesforce related things, I run an initiative called Folding Chair, which is what most people want to talk about, and it creates space for Black and brown people to get their first or second roles in product management.
Sorry, I was trying to take myself off mute. Thank you so much. Melinda, do you want to go next?
Sure, thanks. I am excited to be here. My name is Bumuna Oladipo. I am the SVP of Product Design and Engineering at Kickstarter. I think the opportunity I have being in the role that I am in is that I get to shape the culture of the organization that I want to be able to shape. So I'm excited to be talking about some of the things that I have experienced firsthand that I can bring to the experiences as I create for people as they come into my organization.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, Anthony, do you want to give us a brief intro of who you are and what you're up to?
Sure. So, hey, y'all. I'm Anthony D. Mays, software engineer at Google. I survived childhood physical and sexual abuse when I was young. Was put in foster care. Grew up in Compton as a foster kid there, and I went on to learn computers and learn programming. Graduated from college thinking these people don't want to hire no Black dude from the hood. And eventually, though, made my way to Google on my second try, and my story has been immortalized by BuzzFeed in a video that came out a few years ago. So deeply honored to be able to share with you all and participate on this panel.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, all of you. Okay, so we're going to jump right into it. I think, the first thing, one of the things I like to do, language is so important. Words mean so many things to so many people. We can kind of have different interpretations of what different things. And, this title of this session is, clearing software engineers culture fit, air quotes, landmines. And really there's a lot to unpack even in that title, right? There's a lot of assumptions, there's a lot of subtext, that basically, getting into these roles isn't easy. It's not easy to thrive in them, especially if you look like the folks on this panel. And so the kind of concept of landmines, of course, kind of implies that there are these hidden obstacles that we should be aware of that can pop up at any time and be really dangerous. And so I wanted to just kind of briefly get your thoughts, from the whole panel on what is your interpretation of what we mean by kind of culture fit landmines in software engineering? How do you define it? How do you experience it? I will kick off with Marty.
Oh, okay. So when I'm thinking about those landmines, I would honestly, it goes past software engineering. They are in product, they are in most R&D functions, sometimes just across the company in general. But you'll see it in the interview. You'll see it. You might have a fit interview. You might see it on a rubric if you're an interviewer that I'm supposed to determine their fit. But fit is just a way for somebody to basically say whether or not they want to work with somebody like you. And there is no definition. And typically, like you means like minded, um, appearance wise, background wise. And it's an easy way to vet out a candidate or to push out a candidate in lieu of somebody who is more like you. And so that's where you see some of those trends with nepotism in tech. You see some of those trends where you are working with very homogeneous teams or looks alike, or it's like all white guys or something like that. All of that comes from that idea of, are you a culture fit for our company? Some companies are getting rid of it. I think some companies are leading the way. I think Netflix does a great job. Salesforce, I think even Google is getting rid of it too. But it is still very loud and prevalent, and a way to basically wall off opportunities for uh, people who don't fit the status quo.
Yeah. Rhonda, what are your thoughts on? I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of like touche, piggyback off that.
I am in the amen corner over here for what Marty is saying. And I appreciate what you said, Lauren, about how language and words matter. Because when I saw the title of the conversation, I'm like, culture, fit, landmines, like all of that is problematic. Honestly, this concept of culture fit, like that's a landmine in and of itself, to Marty's point. Like, who sets the culture? What does fit mean? Those are questions that come up for me. Who determines, to Marty's point, whether or not someone is a fit? So for me, when I think about this concept, there are just so many like unwritten, unspoken rules that we have to navigate on top of our day job, on top
Right.
of getting the position. And so it just really begs the question of like, how do we disrupt the conditions that even make that okay, right? So we can take that question off of the rubric. We can say we don't do that anymore. But when the folks who are on the interviewing side of the table haven't had that heart and mind change, that landmine is still there. And often when the folks who are making the decision either not deeply proximate to communities like ours or are not inclusive of communities like ours in the decision making, it still persists. So I think there is both like systemic work and individual work that has to happen to just really nix that idea.
100%. I think the reality is that this is something, frankly, that's so pervasive, so deeply baked into kind of the DNA and culture of so many tech companies, that it's going to take more than just a few policy changes. It truly is these like huge transformational work to shift culture in that way. Anthony, what are your thoughts? You're at Google. It's a massive, massive organization that has like a lot of really specific ways of, really specific interview processes and things like that. So yeah, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I believe that being at Google has been an amazing experience for me is because of the culture. I really enjoy Google culture and the things that are good about it. Not to say there are negative things, but a large part of what attracts people to the company is the culture that they have. And I think that for me, there has to be a balance in thinking. Like there's things that's good about culture. There are things that are necessary about a culture, right? Because when you've got people who are like-minded pursuing the same thing, you start to define, the things that the organization values. And if you don't define those things, then you have confusion that happens. And so I think culture is good. Culture is important. Nothing wrong with that. The landmines come when that culture lacks definition and clarity, and when you begin to deviate from the things that matter to that organization and matter to the bottom line. I think that's where the landmines come in. And so often what I see is in tech, there's an inconsistency between the stated and between the stated culture as defined and how that's actually screened for and discussed and talked about in the interview process, in the promotion process, and some of these other things in external comms. And so I think for me, it's about testing the definition of culture and testing the fidelity of what people are saying and doing to what, because I think on paper, when I look at a lot of company cultures, like, yeah, it sounds good. Sounds great. Sounds like something I can get on board with. But if I bring something, to inform and I think bolster an aspect of culture, and you push back against it, the question is, well, is it because it's not a fit or because it's different, right? And so I think when we talk about the landmines, there's a lot of communication that has to happen between organizations and their employees. And by the way, I'll add that part of the reason why we have more cultural landmines now than before is because of increasing diversity, because we're seeing more representation. And whereas culture is more easily definable in a homogenous environment, we're now starting to get something more heterogeneous and or heterogeneous, depending upon where you come from. That really tests the previously conceived notions of what that culture is. And I think that there's just always going to be that tension and that struggle that has to resolve over time as companies get more representative.
What's your take on things in your experience?
I am very much aligned to what everyone has mentioned so far. I think personally, just coming up in my career, there were a lot of instances where I may not have fit the mold for what people were looking for. And a lot of times it was, you're just not a good fit. And I think when you're starting out your career, that's challenging because you don't know what that actually means so that you can actually improve. And you find that as you dig with a person to get more information, they actually don't have anything else to give you. So I think, as I go into organizations and I have the opportunity to lead teams, part of what I enjoy doing is sitting on interview panels and listening to what people say about their interview experiences. Because a lot of times you'll hear people speak about maybe the way someone's communicating, or it's never substantive enough to not give someone or offer someone an opportunity. And I think that awareness and those conversations are important to have. But I find that, in companies, there are a lot of the same and people tend to hire the same. And so that thinking is passed down just through the line. And so, when you're coming in and calling that out, it can make for some very uncomfortable conversations. But I think that's part of the job. And unfortunately, I think that for a lot of us here, that's the role we play in companies. And it's good and bad, because a lot of times you'll find yourself in meetings and people are looking to you to say, what should we do here? Like last summer, everyone's like, what should we say? I'm like, what should you say? Like, what would you do if I wasn't here? So, it's interesting because you don't want to carry the weight for the company, but you also want to make sure that people have opportunity, right? Because unless there's more of us, it's not going to change.
I think you're absolutely right. Every single one of you. So snap for that. And I think, I think the biggest thing that I see is this, like you said, Anthony, that disconnect between what the stated values are and what's really going on behind the curtains. I think we see it across the board. I think we've seen it, in recent, times, post 2020, which was, such a dumpster fire of a year. We're still kind of like crawling out of all the murk and muck. But I think one of the important, it's not enough to just kind of call these things out, right? And have our own lived experiences where we're pointing these out. There's dozens of reports that demonstrate that having more diverse teams lead to better business outcomes. Like, we know that this stuff is not just a moral imperative, it's a business imperative as well. And yet we're still kind of having this conversation in 2021. I want to get to kind of like, let's keep it really real. Like, what is the root? Who stands to benefit from, keeping this status quo the way it is? Because it's not, even if money is or business outcomes are your bottom line, then it would behoove you to have a diverse team and to remove these barriers to entry for folks. So that can't be it, or all of the whole story. So let's talk about, like, for real, like, why is it still like this? And who benefits from keeping folks out and being exclusionary and making it that much more difficult for people to get in these roles, to your point, Marty, not just software engineering roles, but roles across the board, and make it difficult for folks to thrive. And I'll just throw it out there still to anybody who wants to go first.
But I'd love to jump on this one like a grenade. For me, I think so. There's, I'll talk from my experience largely. Like in tech, I've had the honor and privilege of working with some very smart people, in some exceptional people. And when you join a place like Google, it's like big leagues, right? It's just like, wow, man, I'm on the floor with some crazy smart people. And coming in, I was like, I want to like do my part and not look like an idiot. So like when I had to do interviews and was getting trained on interviews, I was like, I want to make sure that I'm not the person that's like accused of letting in riffraffs or something, right? Because my bar wasn't high enough. And so I think as an engineer, I'm trying to like, okay, well, how do I make sure that when I'm interviewing people, that I'm doing so in a way that is not going to make me look like someone who's an incompetent fool, because ultimately who I approve in the process is a reflection on me in one way or another. And so there's that pressure of wanting to stay consistent with what you think the culture and value of the company is, and of what your peers are. And so it can be very convenient to sort of cheat the process by saying, well, I'm just going to find people that look like this person I work with, or that gives me the same sort of emotional reaction that I would have to someone that I know, instead of like really interrogating the strengths that a particular individual has and what they bring to the table, and how the differences that they bring may enrich how we understand the work that's being done. And it takes a lot of work to do that on a person-by-person basis. For instance, if I run into someone who's an introvert, I'm around a lot of type A personalities, folks who know how to step in and lead. Well, if I'm around someone who's introverted, who has a different style of leadership, am I going to take the energy and the time to really understand where they're coming from and the strength and the benefit of what they provide, so that I'm not screening them out based on something that's irrelevant, right? So can they do the work, number one, and then two, is there value to what they're, and so, that's a lot. It's work that I undertake to ensure that I'm not screening someone out based on things that don't matter. But not everyone, I think, is inclined to do that. And I think it's because we cheat the process, because we rely more on the biases, that we end up in this situation where we continue to perpetuate the same things. So there is a lot of pressure, I think, especially, I think, the lower on the totem pole you are, thinking, employees, ground level engineers, middle managers. I think there's a lot of pressure there that I don't necessarily see reflected in higher places in the company, although it's there too.
Yeah.
Oh, so sorry, Ron. I'm gonna let you.
No, you got that, Lauren.
We all want to jump in on this.
I'm just supposed to be moderating. I'm just like, yes, but I wonder if that pressure is like, I would imagine that there's a different type of pressure too that comes from being a Black man in this space and not wanting to like F it up. You know what I mean? And so like mediocre people hire other mediocre people all the time, and they don't lose a wink of sleep over it. So I'm wondering too if that's part of this. That's a landmine in and of itself, is that pressure that we put on ourselves. So that's all I'll say. I'll let Rhonda and Marty go ahead.
So, I mean, to be perfectly honest, and in my experience fighting for candidates from communities like ours, it is mediocre people intimidated by non-mediocre people. It is also, and just to be perfectly honest, it's their own biases and concerns about what it means to have more diverse voices. Like, if I bring in this person, then that means we have to start thinking, I have to basically start looking in the mirror a little bit about my own biases and how I feel about people. I've had folks like, I remember I fought tooth and nail to hire a candidate. And I had somebody who was denying the candidacy. And it turns out they never read the resume. They had made an assumption that the person had never gone to college, made an assumption that they didn't have work experience. And I'm like, you never even reviewed the resume. And they were talking loudly, and they were more senior than I was. And when I heard it, it helped me realize so much of what I already knew, which is you go into some of those interviews thinking like, I don't really want this person on my team to start off with because your own biases. And it's like we created a culture where, or I'm gonna say we created it. They have created a culture where you should say that you are supportive of diversity. You should say that. But in reality, they haven't done that mind work, that hard work. And so they're really not. They're actually super uncomfortable with it. And so they have to, the opportunity they get to control the narrative is when they're interviewing and sourcing teams and doing all that. And it's like, well, I mean, I don't have a problem with diversity. That doesn't mean I have to hire somebody who doesn't look like me. And so that's where you really start to see kind of that the reality of what's going on, which is it's so much in the biases and the intimidation of people and all the magical things that we bring to the table. I've seen it so many times, and I've had to fight for so many candidates, and it is mind-boggling. And a lot of times it comes from people that you think are on the right side of things, and you're just like, whoa, you are so far removed. So I'll pass it over to you, Rhonda. I know you had a thought too.
Whew. Just take a breath because it is so real. I have a thought, but I also want to just like acknowledge the power of this space too. Like we just called out mediocrity, right? Said it out loud, like intimidation. Like there's something powerful about being able to be in community with each other and call a thing, like call it what it is that I don't take for granted. So just want to acknowledge that we're naming it, and that's important. Lauren, when you mentioned like what's the real underneath these landmines, I just kept thinking about like accountability and the lack of accountability, and then something Marty you mentioned earlier around incentives. So when companies and hiring managers and teams and executives are not held accountable, right, by a collective forcing mechanism, then problems persist, and I think there are different incentives that speak to different people. I mean, we just look at the board diversification that happened in 2020 and 2021. If not for the mandate, right, would public companies have so many Black folks, leaders, folks of color, women on their boards? I don't know, and so I think there's just something really important about it not just being the voices of the few who are able to speak up and take that risk and take that weight on, but also collective accountability and incentives.
The only thing I'd add in there is, I think that when people do hire Black folks and like we're diverse, I think there's a tendency to not want to support people in a meaningful way or create the same opportunities for people internally. And so I think not everyone has the same background. Coming from my non-traditional background, I think it's very important to support people throughout their career. So, just because someone doesn't have maybe the product experience, they may have like the analytical experience and some other flavor that you can leverage it. So I think, being more aware of the fact that some people may not have had that opportunity because they just haven't had it, not for lack of want. And so it's also creating opportunity to bring people in and then to nurture their curiosity, nurture their development successfully in the organization. So you don't say, oh, they couldn't cut it after a couple of months. Well, what did you do to bring that person up in their career and help to grow them to a point where they could do it? So I think it's important as well.
Yeah, and I think Ramona too. It's a why would I do if I don't want you here? Why would I do that? I'm almost incentivized to sabotage you, and that's a real part of the experience.
So I kind of want to jump on that a little bit because when you were mentioning something I hear about when we talk about culture fit, like for instance, an aspect of Googliness is curiosity. So by the way, Google's culture, the things that Google espouses, there's a word for it called Googliness, which sounds goofy, but it's a thing. So there's Googliness, and curiosity is part of that representation of what Googliness is all about, right? Like people who are curious who like to ask. One of the things that I ask is, well, how do you measure that, right? How do you get the data on whether someone is being curious or curious enough? Because if we're going to talk about clearing landmines, right, then the communication has to be very clear about what constitutes someone who is a proven curious person or someone who isn't, right? How do you compare two people and their level of curiosity? And those are the questions that we should be asking ourselves, right? It's like, is it represented in the number of questions that you ask in an interview? Is it represented by, a project that you undertook, just because you wanted to do it and you showed the initiative? Does it show in how you blend different techniques across, right? I mean, and that's the kind of thing that where it's like, if I'm asked to assess how curious someone is, those are the kinds of questions that I need to be asking, and I need to have documented, verifiable evidence that that person has demonstrated that. And so I think that, for all the engineering culture that we have in tech, people don't take an engineering-minded approach to assessing culture. It becomes more emotional and more fields-based. We talk about the infamous beer test. Is this a person that I would want to have a beer with after work? And a lot of times that has nothing to do with objective data-driven measures for how that person fits the culture. And so I think we get into a lot of traps when we aren't thinking about what are the tangible attributes of the culture that we care about, and how has this person demonstrated and provided data that they concretely match that. And then, another issue can be, how many attributes do you need? Right? So, not everybody's going to be curious. Not everyone's going to be a type A personality. Not everyone's going to be math smart. They may be smart in other ways, but they may not have a high math EQ. They may have a high emotional EQ. So, how much of that do you need in order to qualify as a culture fit? Or, do you just need to have one or two, or should it be more like 10? And this is one of the things that I think becomes an issue specifically in the career promotion process, because, if you may be looking for certain attributes and someone may meet 90% of them, but the other 10% could use a little work, right? You won't clear a Black person that has 90% of them, but someone who's not Black that only has 80% of them, you're like, yeah, okay, right? So, right, how do you ensure that kind of thing doesn't happen, and how do you have that discussion? And it's a tough one, and I think it's you can't engineer every aspect of that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, I think you can take everything to its logical, rational, or irrational conclusion. And I think typically where you always land is there's still always going to be an opportunity for bias to show it, or for even a framework or a system to be informed by some sort of bias, So even this idea of, having an engineering approach to something that is very soft, assessing soft skills, is also still kind of like, is that the right word we should be using? I'm not sure. So it's just like everywhere you turn, there's something to unpack, there's something to push forward through, and there's something that people are dealing with on a daily basis, which makes it tough to thrive. Thank you for kind of helping us set the stage and making it plain. I think that's very important, Rhonda. I absolutely agree with you. Like, just being in community and being able to talk openly about this stuff is so important. And I want to switch gears a bit to dive in a little bit more into who you all are as humans and people and leaders and tech connoisseurs. And Rhonda, you had mentioned a little bit earlier this importance of being in community, and that's literally what you do with DevColor. And so talk to us a little bit about, how did you pivoted from the kind of nonprofit and education sector, which I get it. Talk to us a little bit about that transition and why, you've been able to kind of, to Mamoon's point, leverage skills that you brought from a whole entirely different kind of career into what you're building now with DevColor.
Yeah, for sure. My story really does start in Arkansas, because I grew up as daughter of a pastor, granddaughter of the first Black elected official in my town, granddaughter and daughter of fierce Black women. And the constant narrative for me was like, we can make a way out of no way. It's never too late to be the first. We have the bouquet of the world to pick from in our own community. So that sense of like abundance and boldness around being community oriented, being Black, being proud of that is something that is in me. And so, I did start my career in the classroom, also teaching in a community that looked a lot like where I grew up. And I loved that work and being in education. And I had a real desire for impact at scale. So it's one thing to, be grinding day in and day out with 30 first graders and who are now graduates, which is wild. But I asked myself the question, like, how can I do more, right, in partnership with communities? And so moved into the nonprofit space and really got passionate about something, I think you said earlier, Lauren, around like values and actions lining up and thinking about how to support leaders and institutions and systems and correcting for that, right? And walking the talk of our values, frankly. So got into people ops work and in the ed tech space. And the moment that I joined Deaf Color and got into community work with this particular incredible community of Black technologists, it was 2020, and I was asking myself as a mother, as a Black woman, like, how can I live in deeper alignment with my values? How can I be bolder about centering Black people, our advancement, our wellness in everything I do? And so for me, it's a privilege that I don't take lightly to be able to work explicitly for the advancement of Black leaders, right? To be able to sign an email rooting for you, us, and everybody Black, like that is a gift. And it's something that I'm really, really grateful for and that I don't take lightly. So for me, there are through lines, from the South to the classroom to community work. And it really is just like impact and alignment with values and what's happening every day. So, we talked about accountability a little bit earlier. I feel like Deaf Color has a real role to play in creating community and safety in this Black space that we're talking about and enjoying together today, but also in partnering with the industry and pushing the industry to walk the talk of what they say they care about. So that's a bit of my story.
I love it so much. And I know, Muna, you had also a pretty non-traditional path to your current role. You've talked about it kind of publicly, and you have, and now you're, a vice president at, one of the most iconic brands on the planet. So talk to us about, like, what was that like, and how have you, navigated the challenges, and what were some of your triumphs as you kind of navigated your career?
Yeah. So I say to anyone who doesn't know what they want to do in life, it's okay because you'll figure it out. I was pre-med when I graduated and thought I was going to be a doctor and all that fun stuff. Didn't do it, and made my way into the world of product with a lot of stops. And the thing that I think is consistent throughout my career was sort of that risk that I learned I needed to take to get ahead. It was very challenging to find that next role and find the next opportunity, but I had a clear mind as to what it is that I wanted to accomplish. And a lot of what I was geared towards was the experience I needed to be what I felt I could be. I never had like a role in mind. It was more so the impact I could have to others. And I knew that I wanted to be able to lead teams in a direction that I felt that they could thrive in. And so my focus has just been really gathering skills and picking up opportunities. And so once I get into a role, my biggest thing is, how much risk can I take? And what can I afford to make mistakes on? And I just go for it. I built out at Sony Music, I built out a couple of teams that they didn't have before. I've worked at terrible startups. I've worked at good companies, I've done it. And I think that, it's hard. It's definitely hard. And it's definitely, in the moment, it doesn't feel as good. But I think that looking backwards, all those experiences help you better relate to the people that you are going to bring along in their careers. And for you to be a human being when a person is asking you for help. Because, I think a lot of times other people haven't gone through those experiences, so they can't relate to that person who's struggling to get their first job or trying to figure out how to speak in an interview or what they should wear or how they should put their hair. So being privileged enough to be in the space I am today, I think that those experiences really molded me to be able to support others even outside of just my regular manager day-to-day interactions. And then as a manager, being that human being and knowing what it's like to make those terrible mistakes and think that you're going to be fired, to be on the side of that to say, it's not that big of a deal. Let's learn from that together. Let's talk through versus maybe when I had done it, when they were like, I don't know if this is a good fit. And it's like, it's just a mistake. Like, let's talk through it. I'm sure I can fix it, So I think being able to give people that hand that I wasn't given is like the goodness that came out of those experiences.
It's really Black women for me. Anthony, I love you. I'm just like,
I love Black women too. It's cool.
I have a whole sweatshirt to kind of, I'm just so, Anthony, I'll head over to you. So you've got, I love this about you. So in your LinkedIn, you have an entire kind of like FAQ, which I'm like, why don't I have that? I'm going to do that. And it's basically just lets people know exactly who you are, how to reach you, what things that, they could reach out to you about. And it basically gives me like, you can't pick my brain for free energy. And I really love that. But one part of the FAQ links to kind of a blog post that you wrote that really breaks down the process for folks who are looking to interview at Google and maybe don't have, 6 whole months or something, and they're doing it in a condensed timeline. Talk to me a little bit about that article and how it's kind of been received and the why behind it.
Yeah, so, I think one of the things that was important, so I'm just going to go super deep. I grew up learning about the legacy of my ancestors who preceded me, Black men and women who were innovators during a time when Black folks were running away from dogs and water hoses and hangings and this and that and the other, accomplishing incredible things that they shouldn't have been able to do, but that they did. And I talk about my favorite inventors, Garrett A. Morgan, Lewis Latimer. Garrett A. Morgan invented the precursor to the modern traffic light, gas mask apparatus that formed the foundation of what firefighters use when they run into a burning building today. Lewis Latimer inventing the better filament for Edison's light bulb and drafting all the designs for the patent. These are folks who were innovators, and I grew up learning about them. I said, I want to be like them. I was inspired by them. And so when I came into tech, my thinking was that I need to continue the legacy and tradition of innovation that has already been following me. And I decided very early on that when I got, to Google, that I was going to do anything I could to ensure that when I left, there were another 2 or 3 folks who could take my place, coming from underrepresented background, from background similar to where I came from. And I think the article came out of that motivation, because I understood that there are a lot of people like me who didn't go to MIT and Harvard, who didn't have a class on how to do technical interviewing, at their school, who didn't have a network of a brother, sister, cousin, uncle, whatever, who was in Silicon Valley and could tell me about, like, hey, here's some things that you should do, here's some things you shouldn't do. Like, I didn't have that. And I remember when I failed the Google interview the first time, I felt like I let down myself, my family, my church, the people who was praying for me, and all Black people everywhere. That's not something that I don't know a lot of candidates experience. And so, I just felt like I was representing the community, because I was like, I might be the last Black person, I might be the first or the last person that that whoever this person I'm talking to is, that they may interview. And so I wanted to make sure that that I provided a way for people who had the talent, had the ability, had the intelligence, but just didn't have the tips. To get the information that they needed in order to succeed. And I feel like that has been very helpful. One of the things that has also been helpful, and I think this kind of goes to the topic of clearing landmines, is I've learned how to be more and more transparent as a person in tech. and just to put stuff out there. And I think it has been rewarded by the people that follow. It has been rewarded by people that follow me, and have tracked my story. I told my boss, like, you ain't never managed somebody like me that's been physically, sexually abused, had to deal with trauma, growing up in the hood, and this and that and the other, have friends who were shot and killed, and family members, and had to preach their funeral. You ain't managed anybody like me. So I just want you to know that I know, and I'm here with you, and I'm going to work as hard as I can. But there's some learning that we both got to do. Amen. Right? I tell my team, y'all, I ain't working on Sunday. You know why? Because I'm at church. Because I'm a Christian. Because Christ is the person in whom my identity is wrapped up, and you got to be okay with that, right? But they won't know, and they won't be able to accommodate for that if I'm not being honest about, like, the fact that I want to see collard greens on the menu sometime. Like, can a brother get collard greens sometimes? Can we get some fried fish? It don't always have to be baked, right? So just being that honest and transparent about all the different aspects of what it's like to be Black and to be a Black man in tech has been very, very important to me. I think you see that in the ways that I interact online and on social media, and at work.
It's just so beautiful, and I know I just explained my love for Black women, but I also do have a huge special place in my heart for Black men, especially those who are just so confident in their ability to be vulnerable, to be transparent, to be authentic. And I'm absolutely certain that that is creating space in whatever room and space or team that you're on for others to do the same. So kudos to you for that, because I think that's so incredibly important, and we absolutely need to see that more. Marty. So, okay, one of the things I read about you was that you are a self-proclaimed kind of organizer of chaos, okay? And one of the things that I quickly noticed when I transitioned from the nonprofit sector into tech is that there's just always fires that need to be put out. There's just chaos is the name of the game. Is this something, you are a person who oversees and has such a hand in the development of really incredible products that come out of the line. And so how was that always something that was a part of you? Is that something that you learned throughout your career journey? How do you harness that? How has it benefited you? How has it inhibited you? Like, tell us all of it, all the tea.
You know what? In the spirit of keeping it real, I'm gonna give you all the tea. So I would say, for the most part, one thing I always loved about product is when I got into it, I realized it was an extension of my natural self. So I would say, for the most part, I've always been somebody who got stuff together, whether that was get the family get together, get the group trip to Tulum together, whatever it was. I was always that person. And so it was natural to be that person at work. The issue comes in when I first was starting to get my bearings a bit. How do I say this? I think I was struggling with being confident in that person, because I realized it could be intimidating for other people for me to be that person, because it was a lot of, who are you? Who are you to be able to say that we need to do this better? And to Anthony's point, as I started being more transparent and authentic with who I was and my story and how I show up, people started to respect me more. And so I've always said, you don't have to like me, just respect me. But one of the other things I realized too is, as I started, because the way I organize chaos and keep things together and push teams towards unreasonable expectations and pushing out quality software and doing all these things against sometimes it feels like all odds, is relationships a lot for me. And so what I realized is, when I would start to build more relationships with people and be more transparent and show them who I am, then what would happen was they would be more willing to work with me. They'd be more willing to help me towards my goals. And if I did make a mistake, or if I did fall short, to Amuna's point, I got a lot more grace, because it was like, you know what? I know Marty, and I know she didn't mean to do that. They were more likely to assume good intent. But when I was kind of keeping up this very big wall around who I was at home versus who I am at work, and y'all are only going to get what I give you kind of thing, and just do what I ask you and don't ask questions, I realized it really didn't work. And so as I got a little bit more comfortable, things started coming together. So that is kind of basically how I did it. And I think now, one of the things I can confidently say is the more I let go of code switching, trying to be a certain thing, fit into a certain box of what I felt like a Black woman or a Black future executive or whatever it should look like, and the more I was just like, you know what, I'm just be me and you either gonna like it or not, people loved it. I couldn't like the more straightforward and candid I was, the more people wanted to work with me. They're like, I don't have to second guess what I do with you. I don't have to worry about whether you're going to get something done. And so we were able to start, or I was able to start having more success. And so then things like doing 0 to 1 products where there is so much to be defined and figured out became something I was really good at and I could do all the time because I knew how to go in, build the relationships, use relationships to get product out the door and to start doing things. And then those relationships would also pay off on the back end because that would help me move in my career as far as promotions and all those other things too. So it was like a method to the madness.
I love that so much. Rhonda, go ahead.
Yeah. One thing that comes up for me is just thinking about how hard it is often to get to that point where we're just going to go for it and be authentic, right? I think earlier in my career, I struggled with that because I'm like, it feels super risky. And, you know, everyone doesn't have the privilege of showing up as our full selves. And so I just want to acknowledge that, like, it can be really, really difficult. And the folks on this panel are in positions in which we're able to do that. And it is also true that there are some teams and organizations where the risk is really great. And so I think for folks who are either earlier in their career or in really challenging situations, there's power in teaming up with Black leaders who have already made that choice, who can mentor you, sponsor you, give you one word of advice that changes the game and changes your trajectory. So I just want to acknowledge the tension in that we're doing it and it's super, super hard, but there are folks who have cleared that challenge and would be, you know, happy to connect and support folks who are still working through that authenticity piece.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to note in my story because when I started doing it, I was at the bottom. I was ready to quit. I had just moved to the Bay. I was like, I just reroute. At the time I'd been doing, like I said, I'd always been in tech, but I was in Detroit. Detroit obviously is a lot different experience than San Francisco. And so I was at my bottom and I was like, you know what, forget it. I'm just going to be this person because I'm so fed up and I'm tired. But it was like, when I started doing that, it actually worked to my benefit. But at that point, I didn't have anything to lose because I was at that place. And ironically enough, and this is the craziest part of it all, is it was my white male leaders who encouraged it and who said we needed me in the room because I was candid and straightforward and they knew I was going to get things together and all of that. And so allyship for me was another big thing that kind of helped open doors because when my first product job, I was the first Black person that they hired, and my company was a public company that had been around for, at that time, maybe 15, 20 years, and they had never hired a Black woman in product or a Black person. And so there wasn't anybody to lean on. And so having to create some relationships that were able to help me find kind of my voice and my confidence in those situations was huge. And then having that community and support outside of work for people who would navigate it. But for me, that at that time, it wasn't in the office. It wasn't in my company.
You know, and I thank you so much, Rhonda, for calling that out and for your sharing with us, Marty, your kind of journey and your experience. And I think one thing that comes to mind, and it's the last thing I'll say before I open up to audience questions, I promise. You know, I think one of the things that I struggled with very, very early in my career is, especially when I started to have kind of managerial positions or had a little bit of, you know, going a little bit beyond kind of an individual contributor, was that I needed to recognize the ways in which I was being complicit also in reinforcing the status quo. And, you know, so if a young girl came in who had that boldness and she was authentically herself, and I would be like, oh, girl, and I'm like, no, what I'm not going to do is police this other Black woman who's coming in, who's living her best. I'm like, you need to check yourself, Lauren, you know, you need to, you know, interrogate why you feel some kind of way or that you feel like there should be a specific type of way that she's engaging with this organization and that sort of thing. So I think that's the other side of that coin, Rhonda, is, it's so hard to kind of go through that journey by ourselves. And sometimes one of the manifestations of that journey is like, either feeling this sense of maintaining that same status quo as well, which is for a whole nother panel, because we could talk for 3 hours on that part alone. But thank you so much. I do want to get to a few of the audience questions, because I think they will get us into even some nitty gritty tactics around how to kind of navigate some of this. So the first one is from Ton Lee. I hope I'm saying your name right. I'm so sorry if I'm not. And Ton asks, how do you deal with the types of biases at work, those types of biases at work, if it diminishes your accomplishments at work? So instead of a systematic change. So I think, like, I guess on the individual level, that kind of chips away at your either accomplishments or are meant to make you feel, less than or not bring as much value as you can. How do you deal with those sorts of things? And I'll let maybe one or two of y'all answer.
One thing I always say is keep your receipts. You need to be
out of my mouth, Anthony. Was about to be like, receipts.
Just be relentless about it. And the reality is that many of us, especially who are in the employee position, don't do a good job of documenting the impact that we have. And so every line of code that you write, every paper that you produce, every time something that you do makes it to production, every time you bring in money, you should definitely be keeping track of that. That way, when people are just like, I think you need to cut your hair. Okay, well, with this hair that I had on my head, I've been able to generate this much money and save this many dollar bills. And so you might want to think about that, because I don't have to be working here, right? But you can't do that if you're not producing the receipts, number one, and if you're not keeping track of it, because no one else is going to do it for you. That's the other reality of this. I tell young people all the time, like, I can wear my Compton hat on my LinkedIn profile and get jobs because I've been in the game for 20 years and I work at Google. You might not be able to do that, right? You might have to have, and it may not be fair, but it's kind of a reality that you got to have those receipts, and that can open up more doors for you. But suffice it to say, keep your receipts, and that'll help you with that.
Yeah, one to add there, I think that all too often we can play small, you know what I mean, and not own own the fact that we've gotten positive feedback, whether it's in an email or, from a client or a customer. And so just adding on to that receipts piece, like, not just saying, oh, I did this thing, but really naming the impact and going big with that. Of course, keeping your integrity and being honest, but sometimes it's easy for folks to forget how big of an impact we've made, including ourselves. And so I think it's just important not to play small when you're thinking about your own accomplishments and using that to counter subjective and even false narratives about your contributions.
Yes. Show me those receipts. And don't play small. I love that. Oh, go ahead, Movie. You have something to add?
The only thing I was going to add in that is that I think we should call it out when we see it or hear it. So if someone is saying something that is causing you to have to, show your receipts, which I agree with, but you should also be able to call them on it. I mean, is it that they're asking, are they doing the same thing to everyone? Is it just you? Because I feel like over time, they may just think that every time they call it, you have to jump and do something to make them feel comfortable that you are providing value. And I think part of it also is letting them know that you see what they're doing, and acknowledge, like, having that conversation. Yeah.
Call them out, drag them, snatch the wig right on up. I think that actually goes into Inoma's question on the chat, where she writes, I'd love it if someone shared about their experiences addressing kind of group work, both in the interview stage, and the emphasis white spaces place on our lack of boundaries in the workplace to prove we're team players. So this idea of, like, always having to prove the value that you bring, always having to kind of be in the mix, to show that you're, someone that they would want to get a beer with, I guess. So any thoughts on that part?
happy to contribute, but I want to let somebody else go so I don't talk too much. Okay, well, it looks like I'm getting to say. All right, so I think, again, the transparency piece is really important, right? Like just being clear about where you are and what you expect, and also being genuinely interested in what other people in the group bring to the table. I think sometimes I'm tempted to focus more on what I'm bringing and how I'm different than taking the time to understand how other people are bringing things that are different, because I can be guilty of the same kind of bias that I accuse other people of having against me, and not think about it. So if and I happen to work on a pretty diverse team. We've got Black folks, white, Asian, moms, this and that and the other. And so, in addition to like being honest and transparent for me, I'm also listening to like, okay, well, what's going on with you? How do you work and all that stuff? I think one of the things that can be helpful in a team is to actually publicize and talk about, okay, well, this is how I work, this is how I like to do things, blah, blah. Here's the things I respond well to. Here's the things I don't respond well to. Don't hit me up after this time because I'm not talking to you because I'm focused on family, those kinds of things. And that can help, I think, clarify and make clear the communication. I think there's also this other aspect too of I know that spaces weren't designed for me in tech, and I acknowledge that, and I'm honest with people about that. Like, I know this wasn't built for me. One concrete example, like a lot of the, in Google, we got a lot of fancy office furniture, and I ain't seen it in a year, but a lot of fancy office. I'm a tall dude. Like, I can't. That stuff may look nice, but it is very uncomfortable for a tall, lanky dude like me. And sometimes I go up to the people, to do all the furniture. I'm like, yo, this kind of, can I just get like a regular chair, regular couch, the lazy boy maybe, I don't know. It not like, all this chic stuff is sometimes it don't work for me. It just is what it is. And I bring attention to that and bring attention to the fact that I have those differences. But at the same time that I'm being honest and transparent about the ways in which I'm different, I'm also trying to make sure that I'm doing the things that are consistent, again, with what needs to be done on the team, right? So there's certain things that aren't really up for conversation, right? Like good engineering practices, good disciplines from that perspective. And I try to make sure that I'm doing that stuff responsibly and adhering to, what makes sense from that perspective. And so, a lot of times you need to sit down and provide the input, to a team or to your organization. Be like, here are the things that matter. Anything that isn't in this list are the things that don't matter, and we're not going to worry about that. And so being very clear about those expectations is super important. I've seen this over my career, by the way. Just real quickly, I remember when I got to Google, the rules, just be googly, don't be evil. And I remember seeing that for the first time, and I was like, this ain't going, what? Just be googly, what's that mean? Right? Don't be evil, what's that mean? Like, your view of googly and don't be might be a little different than mine. And it's been interesting to see how companies like Google have further defined and refined what the culture means, what a good team looks like, all those other kinds of things. Because again, back when everybody was largely the same, everybody sort of just kind of knew in their heart, I guess. But now you gotta be very explicit about what matters and what doesn't.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say it's okay to build bridges. There's nothing wrong with that part, right? And you want your company to know that you are somebody who wants to contribute in that way. But it's okay to have boundaries too. And to Anthony's point, when you hear that question too, and I know that question they're getting at in the interview that is basically like you're not going to be problematic, you can flip that on its head and kind of change what they're asking you to be more inclusive of how people interact with you. Like, It's really important for me because I have a family or I have whatever, that time is respected. But when I'm here, I show up every day at 110% because, driving impact and being part of a team matters to me. And you can do both of those in tandem. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And you don't have to compromise that part of yourself to show people that you're the bridge builder. If anything, people respect you more when you have a little bit of a boundary.
I love this. I know we have a couple of extra minutes, so if there's any last questions, I think Eric had a question in the chat, but I think folks were popping in some answers, basically kind of what organizations should companies be looking to kind of strengthen their pipeline. And there's tons and tons and tons of amazing organizations that are doing this incredible work. I'm going to go ahead and plug Dev Color, that are just like one of the many in that larger ecosystem that are both supporting talent as well as kind of helping to create and strengthen that pipeline. Not create because it's there, but strengthen and make more accessible that pipeline. But just really to kind of recap the conversation, because I think, these types of conversations can go either way. They can be these like kind of philosophical kind of interrogations of the problem, or they can be very tactical. And I think we've done a good job of kind of doing a little bit of both, which I'm really pleased with. And also getting to know you all a bit more, which I think has been just so wonderfully invaluable for the folks that are tuning in. And so I will kind of throw out some of the high level takeaways that I captured, and let me know if I'm missing anything. But I love the kind of like, show me the receipts, keep those receipts, making sure that you are tracking just all the great things that you're doing in case you ever need to pull them out, but also making sure that you're doing great work so that you have great receipts as well. That authenticity piece of boundaries, asserting those boundaries and showing up as authentic early in your career as you possibly can. I think one of the things that I'm sensing as a takeaway of this is that perhaps if you sense that there are these kind of culture fit landmines at a company that you're interviewing for, that might be a good litmus test to say, you know what, I don't know if this is going to be a place that's going to allow me to thrive. And so leveraging that as almost like, to tap into your discernment. Anthony, I'm going to use some biblical terminology here, but like tapping into that, using it as a mechanism to discern, organizations that would be right for you. Are they good for you? Are they a good fit for you? So I think that's really important. And then not being afraid to kind of make those pivots in your career and leverage the skill sets that you maybe gathered in earlier parts of your career in an entirely different sector, and really bringing those to light in on the technical side and on the tech side as well. So those are some of my high level takeaways. Did I miss anything, y'all?
You did that.
Yeah, that was good.
Be in and build in community, I think, and make it plain. Make it plain. Thank you so much, y'all. I think we're at time. They might be kicking us out soon, but I just really appreciate every single one of you. I hope you don't mind that I'm officially calling you all my like friends, not just like, oh, we want to tell us together, but like friends for real. As you can see on the pinned comment at the top, you can all find us all on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to us. If you see us with FAQs like Anthony has, don't be surprised. So there's that. And thank you so much for just sharing parts of your journeys, and the vulnerability and the realness is just so important. And we have to that's a huge part of tackling this larger problem and making space for other people to kind of come up behind us. So I hope you all enjoyed this conversation. It will be available on demand in case you had to pop in and pop out. But thank you all so much to the panel. Y'all were incredibly amazing. So
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being an excellent moderator.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And let us know when you make the Bridges and Boundaries t-shirts.
You know what? I will. All right. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.